Good morning, class 8. So, this is a new video on the chapter United Nations. Yes, we have finished the history section and we will now be proceeding with the civics section. All right. So, our chapter is United Nations. Now, from the term itself, we get an idea that it talks about unity and also about different nations. Isn't that so? So, the United Nations basically is an organization which was created before the Second World War ended. All right. The main purpose of the formation of the United Nations was to restore peace and stability, which had been totally disrupted by the two historical world wars. Okay, let us now briefly discuss about the First and the Second World War. The First World War started from 1914 to 1918. So it continued for how long? It continued for a time span of 4 years. The First World War brought immense devastation in the entire world. Naturally, wars are accompanied by deadly weapons, isn't it? Bombs, tanks, and armaments. Hence, after the war, an organization was formed which was supposed to prevent another war. So, the countries, okay, some countries they wanted to form an organization, okay, after the First World War ended, so that there wouldn't be any, wars in future. This organization came to be known as the League of Nations. So this organization, which some few countries wanted to form, all right, it came to be known as the League of Nations. Please underline the term League of Nations, which you find it in the second line, first paragraph. Okay. Now, the League of Nations could not be successful in its attempt, and soon the Second World War began in 1939 and went on till 1945. So it was of no use. The League of Nations was of no use because what happened? Soon after it was formed, the Second World War started. So the Second World War lasted for almost 6 years. Before the Second World War came to an end in 1945, the Allied powers held a meeting to establish the United Nations Organization. Now, by the Allied powers, these are new terms, all right? By the Allied powers here, we mean countries like Great Britain, United States, China, and Soviet Union. Soviet Union is now present day Russia. So, these nations planned to create an international organization of countries to work for world peace and eradicate poverty and injustice. Not just that, but also to put a stop to world wars. So, this new organization, what was it known as? It was known as the United Nations Organization, which was formed after the failure of the League of Nations. So, the United Nations was formed on 24th of October 1945. Please highlight these dates which are very important with 51 member countries. So how many member countries were there all around the globe? All around the globe, how many countries joined it? It was joined by 51 members. Fine. The Atlantic Charter was signed by the US President Franklin D. Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Now, what is a charter? It basically means an official document, all right? It is a document setting out the rights and the duties of a group. Fine. So, did we get what a charter is? It is a document, official document, which contains the rights and the duties of a group. And here, by the group, we mean who? It is the United Nations. Now, this charter was a joint declaration by the Allied powers to fight against the Axis power, namely Germany, Italy, and Japan, to preserve the rights of man and justice. So here we see that the Allied powers, we understood, which are the nations which are known as the Allied powers. Now, these Allied powers were fighting against whom? They were fighting against the Axis power. All right. And these Axis power were Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now, the UN Charter came up after three conferences, which were held in Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C., which is in USA. Please highlight all these, very important. Yalta in Ukraine and San Francisco in USA. So your UN Charter, it just did not come about. All right. It just didn't, come in a flip of a second. What happened? There were three conferences which were held in order to bring about this UN Charter. Now, today there are 192 members in the United Nations. So earlier it was just 51, remember? But now today, how many members or how many member countries has joined the United Nations? It is 192. The UN Charter, after agreed by all the member nations, was adopted and signed on 26th of June and entered into force on 24th of October 1945. So these are very important because you might get questions like, when was the UN Charter signed? When did it come into effect? All right, so these dates are very important. The UN Charter gives details about the purposes and the principles of the organization. So one more, statement has been added. What is a charter? The UN Charter gives details about the purposes and the principles of the organization. So you have guidelines in the UN Charter. What are the duties? What are the principles you should follow? All right, in order to be a member of the United Nations. Now we come to the aims of the United Nations. I shall be stressing only on few aims, all right, of the United Nations, and these are as follows. First, to save the succeeding generation from the scourge of war. Now, succeeding meaning the coming generation, isn't it? The coming generation, the future generation, and scourge of war meaning the burden of war. So, the first aim of the United Nations is to save the coming generation, the future generation, from the burden of war. That is first. Fine. Second, to reaffirm faith in the fundamental and the human rights. Now, to reaffirm meaning to state, to establish, all right, to establish the fundamental and the human rights. Now what do you mean by fundamental rights? Fundamental rights meaning those rights which are actually required for the overall development of an individual. Okay, so the UN tries to establish fundamental rights, or the rights which are necessary for the development of an individual. Got that? Moving on with the third one, to promote social progress and better standard of life. Naturally, better standards of life, all right, to uplift the standard. If the poor countries, okay, the poor countries which do not have a good standard of life, the UN tries to uplift their living standard by giving them, you can say, help, okay, providing them help financially or in any other way. Then we move on to another point, that is the fourth point, which is most important, to maintain international peace and security. So, to maintain international peace, all right, that is the main objective of the United Nations, isn't it? To stop all wars, okay, to stop all of these, commotion or you can say devastation that has been brought about, and to restore or to maintain peace. But peace, what? Not nationally, but internationally, all over the world. Last one, to develop friendly relation among the nations. So to develop friendly, all the nations, if they have friendly ties, if there is brotherhood among all the nations, then what is going to happen? There is no question of any wars. Fine. So we are done with this. Now we move on to the organs. Okay, before moving on to the organs of the United Nations, let us just learn this, which is very important. The headquarter of the organs of the UN, all right, the headquarter of the UN, United Nations, is at New York. Please underline or highlight this. Just the headquarters, just know that the headquarters of the United Nations, it is in New York. Fine. Moving on to the organs now. There are 6 organs of the UN. These are General Assembly, Security Council, Economic and Social Council, Trusteeship Council, and then you have Secretariat and International Court of Justice. Now, the headquarters of all of these organs are situated in New York, except for the International Court of Justice. Fine. Which is located at Hague in the Netherlands. So, all of the 5 headquarters of these organs is located in New York, except which organ? It is the International Court of Justice, that is in Hague in the Netherlands. Fine. The official language that is used for communication in the United Nations are as follows. So in order to communicate, in order to, when there is conferences held, when there are discussions held, all right, what are the languages that is used in the United Nations organization? It is Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Spanish, and Russian. These are the official language which is used by the member nations of the United Nations. Got it? Now we move on to the first organ of the UN, that is the General Assembly. Firstly, let's study about the General Assembly now. It is the biggest organ of the UN. Please highlight that. It is the biggest organ of the UN. So from amongst the 6 organ, this is the biggest. The member countries can send up to 5 members in the General Assembly, but there is a voting But when there is a voting in the UN, one country is allowed only one vote. So what do we mean by that? Now from India, if we are sending, okay, individuals, okay, or personals into the General Assembly, you can send up to 5 members, all right, to be a member of the General Assembly. But when there is a voting in the United Nations, all right, when there are voting, votes has to be cast from amongst the 5 members, the individuals, only one member can cast their vote from each country. Got it? Fine. The General Assembly meets for conferences once for 3 months in a year. So they just meet once for 3 months in a year. Some important functions of the General Assembly are as follows. The functions of the General Assembly are written in very simple language, all right, which is easy to understand. So I'll just be reading. Number one, it can discuss any matter affecting international peace and security. So here also, okay, the General Assembly, the main first function of the General Assembly is to, it discusses, it plans out, all right, how to maintain international peace, how to bring about peace in the entire world. Second, it passes the budget of the UN. Now, by budget, what do we mean? By budget, we mean the income and the expenditure, isn't it? So the UN, it passes the budget. The passing of the budget, the approval of the budget, it is taken up by whom? It is taken up by the General Assembly. Thirdly, it elects the 10 non-permanent members of the Security Council. So Security Council is another organ, and 10 non-permanent members are elected by General Assembly to the Security Council. It elects the members of the Economic and the Social Council, which is also known as ECOSOC, and judges for the International Court of Justice. So here we see, the election or the appointment of, most of the members to the different organs, it is done by the General Assembly. Fine. Last one, it admits new members in the United Nations on the recommendation of the Security Council. So if any other country, if any other nation which is not a part of the United Nations and wants to be a part, it can, admit these new members or these new nations, but on the recommendation of the Security Council. Now we move on to the second organ, that is the Security Council. It is the most important organ as it deals with the question of war and peace. So please highlight it, most important organ. There are 5 permanent members of the United Nations, namely USA, UK, Russia, France, and China, who played an important role in establishing the UN. All right. So these 5 nations, these are, the permanent members of the United Nations. Why are they called the permanent members? Because they had a very important role, a key role in establishing the United Nations. That is why they are termed as the permanent members. Okay, please highlight these the name of these nations. They enjoy a power called the veto, which actually means right to disagree or to refuse. So these 5 member nations of the UN, which are the permanent members, they contain or they have this power which is known as a veto. And what is the meaning of veto? It is to refuse or to disapprove or to disagree. Okay. So if one member from the 5 disagrees on something, then it will not be approved. All right. So for instance, let's say from amongst the 5, there's a discussion held, and they are, heading for a proposal. All right, a proposal has been set, and now they have to vote whether, they want to go ahead with this proposal or not. Now all the 4, countries, they have approved, but if China says no, we do not agree with this, all right, and we do not approve of it, then what is going to happen? That proposal is going to get cancelled. Did you understand? So this is the power of veto, the right to disagree, the right to disapprove. All right. Hence, all the 5 members have to agree. Otherwise, it is cancelled. The 10 non-permanent members of the Security Council are elected by the General Assembly. This we have already done in the functions or the aims of the General Assembly, remember. The Security Council imposes actions on the countries violating the norms of the UN Charter. So we have done the UN Charter, and it said that it contains the guidelines, okay, the duties, the rights of the rights, okay, that the nations have to follow, the member nations have to follow. So if any of the member nation does not follow the UN Charter, then the Security Council can, impose what? Action, all right, against these countries, or punishment, you can say. It has played a it here meaning the Security Council. The Security Council has played a leading role in stopping wars amongst different countries. One such big example is the Desert Storm operation, which was conducted by the UN forces. Now, what was this Operation Desert Storm? I'll just be, discussing it briefly. All right. Now, Iraq had started to send well equipped Iraqi army into Kuwait, which was a major supplier of oil to the US. So Kuwait was a supplier of oil to the US. But now what was happening? The Iraqi soldiers were sent to Kuwait in order to capture Kuwait. So United States was totally dependent on the oil of Kuwait. The UN responded to the Iraqis' invasion on Kuwait by supplying 500,000 American troops to the Iraqi attack. This way, with the armed forces under the UN, Kuwait was freed from the Iraqi attack. So, this way, it tried to free or liberate Kuwait from the Iraqi attack. All right. So, I shall keep it till here for today. The second half of the chapter shall be uploaded soon. Till then, boys and girls, please go through the video, your books, and the extra mark presentation for a clearer understanding. Thank you.